you know. I mean, do you know why I do what I do? The reason why I do what I do is because it's what everybody wants to do.
In the thunderous world of heavy metal, where chaos and charisma collide, few figures have carved a path as polarizing as Ozzy Osbourne, of the Prince of Darkness. He didn't just rise to fame, he exploded into it, a walking contradiction. Of brilliance and bedlam, idolized by millions and despised by more than a few of his own peers. But what if the madness wasn't just part of the act? What if Ozzy's legendary antics, the bat-biting, the devilish lyrics? The erratic interviews weren't merely tabloid fodder, but a deeper provocation that cut to the core of what metal artists believe their genre should represent. Ozzy wasn't just noisy. He was disruptive in a way that threatened long-held ideals about authenticity, musical integrity, and the image of rock itself. He broke molds, shattered expectations, and perhaps most dangerously, succeeded wildly while doing it all his own way. To fans, he was a messiah of mayhem. But behind the scenes, the story was far messier. Ozzy's rise didn't just crown a king, it created a battlefield. His influence sparked jealousy, contempt, and outright hostility from fellow icons who saw in him not a kindred spirit, but a destructive force shaking the foundations of the music they held sacred. From whispered backstage jabs to open public feuds, some of the genre's most respected voices didn't just critique Ozzy, they loathed him. And this wasn't a passing dislike. These were artists who built careers hating what Ozzy represented. Spectacle over substance, chaos over craft, controversy over control. So, what exactly did he do to provoke such wrath? Was it his unpredictability, his unfiltered mouth, or simply the way he stole the spotlight? Whatever it was, it triggered a level of animosity that festered for decades. And in the shadow of Ozzy's booming success lies a tale of 6 bitter rivalries, each more twisted than the last. These aren't just grudges, they're war stories that expose the hidden fractures of metal's golden age. So, buckle up. Because what comes next isn't just noise, it's the untold saga of Ozzy's wrath and the legends who couldn't stand him. Asterisk. Long before he became a household name through reality TV or wild tabloid headlines, Ozzy Osbourne was already a myth in the making, a man whose mere presence could electrify an errand or tear apart a friendship. Born John Michael Osbourne in Birmingham, England, his rise to prominence began with Black Sabbath, a band that didn't just play heavy music, they defined it. From the haunting riffs of War Pigs to the spine-chilling mood of Black, Sabbath Ozzy's eerie vocals helped forge the blueprint of metal itself. But even in those early days, it was clear that Ozzy wasn't built like the others. While his bandmates leaned into the music, Ozzy leaned into madness. He was theatrical, unfiltered and chaotic in a way that both thrilled fans and unsettled fellow musicians. As his solo career skyrocketed after leaving Black Sabbath, the line between man and myth blurred. The infamous bat-biting incident wasn't just a shock, it became a symbol of his unpredictability, whether he was collapsing on stage, swearing during interviews, or diving headfirst into scandals. Ozzy turned every moment into a spectacle. To his followers, he was the fearless showman, the unhinged genius who dared to embody the darkness others only sang about. But behind the curtain, his antics stirred something far less celebratory in the hearts of his peers. While Ozzy was collecting platinum records and selling out arenas, other musicians were quietly or sometimes loudly growing resentful. They saw him not as a visionary but as a walking PR stunt, someone who diluted the seriousness of metal with cheap tricks and tabloid fodder. For purists who believed the genre demanded respect, Ozzy's unpredictable behavior wasn't just embarrassing, it was an affront. And as his fame grew, so did the chorus of voices who felt he was leading metal astray. These weren't random critics, or fellow legends, artists who had dedicated their lives to crafting metal into something pure, technical, and enduring. And to them, Ozzy represented everything they feared: the commercialization of rebellion, the circus act wearing the crown, the chaos that could swallow the credibility of their craft. What followed was a series of bitter clashes, some public, some whispered in green rooms and interviews, but all echoing the same sentiment: Osbourne was a problem they couldn't ignore. And in the eyes of 6 iconic musicians, he wasn't just a fellow artist, he was the enemy of everything they stood for. Asterisk. When Ronnie James Dio stepped into the void Ozzy Osbourne left behind in Black Sabbath in 1979, he wasn't just replacing a frontman, he was stepping into a battlefield already soaked with egos, expectations, and resentments. To fans, it seemed like a natural evolution, one legendary voice succeeding another. But behind the scenes, it was more like a hostile takeover, and Dio made no secret of his contempt for the man he replaced. While the public narrative remained relatively cordial, industry insiders whispered of Dio's biting private commentary. He reportedly dismissed Ozzy as a clown who stumbled into fame, accusing him of leaning on gimmicks rather than grit. Where Dio composed intricate fantasy narratives and honed a powerful, operatic voice, Ozzy reveled in shock value and chaos, embodying a style that Dio considered juvenile and detrimental to the genre's credibility. According to music journalist Malcolm Dio, often lamented that Ozzy's success turned metal into a sideshow act style over substance. Theater over technicality? The bitterness peaked in the mid-'80s when the two crossed paths backstage. Dio, according to witnesses, deliberately turned away from Ozzy, muttering something about real metal versus cartoon metal, a statement that captured his disdain for what he perceived as Ozzy's circus-like stage persona. Though he never always named Ozzy directly, interviews from the time are laced with veiled jabs about entertainers who confuse spectacle with skill. To Dio, metal was sacred, a form of storytelling with roots in mythology, not a platform for publicity stunts and headline-chasing madness. And Ozzy, in his eyes, had not only defiled that vision, but dominated it. Dio's frustration wasn't merely personal, it was philosophical. He believed metal deserved respect, that it should be taken seriously as an art form. And in Ozzy's flamboyant legacy, he saw a threat to that reverence. The contrast between them was almost poetic. Dio, the disciplined wizard of melody and mysticism, and Ozzy, the chaotic preacher of darkness and destruction. Their feud wasn't just about personality, it was a war for the soul of heavy metal. And even as the years passed and the scene evolved, Dio never publicly softened his stance. In interviews late into his life, when asked about the state of metal and its icons, Dio would always steer clear of Ozzy's name, as if even uttering it gave too much validation to a man. He considered the antithesis of everything metal should be. In the end, Dio may have stood taller in vocal range, but it was Ozzy who commanded the spotlight. And perhaps that's what stung the most. Phil Anselmo, the brooding and brutally honest frontman of Pantera, didn't just revolutionize metal in the 1990s, he redefined its aggression, its philosophy, and its cultural weight. But to Anselmo, Ozzy Osbourne was more than a relic of the past. He was a symbol of everything metal needed to leave behind. While Pantera surged with a new wave of groove metal, raw, muscular, stripped of glam, Ozzy was still packing stadiums with theatricality and nostalgia, a fact that enraged Anselmo behind the scenes. Though the two frontmen shared the same genre, their visions clashed at a cellular level. Anselmo, steeped in a philosophy of progression and authenticity, reportedly saw Ozzy as a has-been who coasted on decades-old glory, a man whose fame was now more about antics than innovation. According to Metal Hammer journalist Jeff Barton, Anselmo once referred to Ozzy in a private 1994 interview as someone who had turned metal into a joke, openly questioning why the industry continued to revere a performer whose prime was long behind him. But Anselmo's disdain wasn't confined to whispers, it erupted in real life. At a major 1995 metal festival, when both Pantera and Ozzy were on the bill, witnesses claimed Anselmo flat-out refused to acknowledge Ozzy backstage. When introduced, he allegedly said loud enough for others to hear, "I don't shake hands." With people who've turned metal into a joke, it wasn't just a snub, it was a declaration of war. Anselmo's critique cut deeper than the usual generational gap. To him, Ozzy's continued dominance didn't just overshadow younger talent, it undermined the evolution of the genre itself. While Pantera fought to move metal forward, Ozzy represented what Anselmo saw as stagnation, carnival act, playing greatest hits for an audience afraid of change. In interviews from the era, Anselmo would frequently hammer the point home without ever naming Ozzy directly, saying things like, "Some people are stuck in 1975, and metal needs to evolve or it dies. Everyone in the industry knew exactly who those barbs were aimed at. Even as Ozzy announced farewell tours and began retreating from the spotlight, Anselmo's tone never softened. He didn't see Ozzy as a pioneer deserving tribute, he saw him as a ghost, still haunting a genre, trying desperately to grow. And in that friction, Anselmo became not just a critic of Ozzy, but a figurehead for an entire generation that demanded more from metal than nostalgia and bat-biting headlines. To them, and to Anselmo especially, Ozzy wasn't the future. He was the warning. Asterisk Bruce Dickinson, the soaring, articulate frontman of Iron Maiden, was never one to bite his tongue, especially when it came to protecting the sanctity of heavy metal. And few things seemed to irritate him more than the spectacle-driven chaos that Ozzy Osbourne brought to the genre they both helped define. Their feud wasn't born out of direct confrontation, but rather simmered over years of philosophical divergence, sharpened by backstage encounters and biting commentary that never quite named names, but made its targets unmistakably clear. In the early 1980s, as Iron Maiden and Ozzy's solo career vied for dominance in the British metal scene, Dickinson was already quietly fuming. According to Kerrang! Founder Jeff Barton, Dickinson once scoffed to a group of journalists that Ozzy was more P.T. Barnum than Robert Plant, suggesting his success was manufactured through gimmicks and sensationalism rather than vocal talent or musical complexity. While Iron Maiden constructed elaborate operatic albums laced with historical themes and virtuoso instrumentation, Ozzy was decapitating doves, snorting ants, biting batsall while making global headlines and selling out tours. This wasn't harmless showmanship. It was a betrayal of what metal should be. He reportedly believed that Ozzy's antics degraded the genre, making it harder for serious musicians to be taken seriously. In a German radio interview in 1983, Dickinson famously said, "Real metal doesn't need gimmicks, should stand on musical merit, not on how many dead animals you can mutilate on stage," stopping just short of naming Ozzy, but leaving no doubt about his target. The disdain was mutual and palpable. At a 1984 industry party, Dickinson allegedly refused to be photographed with Ozzy, telling a photographer that some associations damage your credibility as a serious musician. Despite Iron Maiden's global success and legions of loyal fans, Dickinson remained vocal in his view that Ozzy's celebrity was built more on controversy than on craft. Even decades later, when asked to name influential metal vocalists, Dickinson routinely skipped over Ozzy's name, instead praising legends like Ian Gillan and Robert Plant, vocalists known for technical precision, not tabloid stunts. The clash between them was more than an ego, it was ideology. Dickinson saw heavy metal as an art form rooted in discipline, narrative, and virtuosity, while Ozzy embraced chaos, theatrics, and primal showmanship. In Bruce's eyes, the Prince of Darkness wasn't just a peer, he was a walking contradiction to everything Iron Maiden stood for. And though they both occupied the upper echelons of metal fame, Dickinson's refusal to publicly endorse or even acknowledge Ozzy spoke volumes. Their silent war waged on in interviews, backstage glances, and unspoken exclusions, each one a reminder that in the world of metal, not all legends bow to the same gods. Asterisk for Dave Mustaine, the combustible leader of Megadeth, rejection has always been rocket fuel, and when that rejection came from none other than Ozzy Osbourne, it ignited a bitter feud that would smolder for decades. After being ousted from Metallic and fighting his way back to the top with Megadeth, Mustaine was obsessed with legitimacy. He wanted recognition, respect, and revenge in equal measure. So in the mid-1980s, when Mustaine attempted to secure a collaboration or even a tour slot with Ozzy, then one of the most commercially powerful forces in metal, he was met with silence. No interest, no deal, not even a callback. According to Bernard Doe of Metal Forces magazine, the slight struck a nerve so deep that Mustaine's ego never quite recovered. He reportedly saw Ozzy's rejection not just as a business move, but as a personal insult, a dismissal of thrash metal's rise and Megadeth's legitimacy. Former roadies later revealed that Mustaine became obsessed with proving Ozzy wrong, often venting that the Prince of Darkness viewed thrash as angry noise without melody or soul. Ozzy's alleged 1987 comment to a British journalist that these new thrash bands are just angry kids making angry noise added salt to an already festering wound, and Mustaine took it personally. When Ozzy launched Ozzfest in the 1990s, a touring metal juggernaut that could have elevated any band overnight, Megadeth was conspicuously absent from the early lineups. Mustaine cried foul, telling Metal Hammer the snub was personal politics, and a calculated move by dinosaurs trying to gatekeep the genre's biggest stages. The animosity reached a new level in 1998 at an awards show, where Mustaine openly snubbed Ozzy during introductions, turning away and reportedly muttering, "Respect is earned, not inherited." Ozzy, visibly confused, stood in awkward silence. While the tension thickened around them, even during Megadeth's later critical peaks, Mustaine never dropped his resentment. Interviews often featured subtle digs at artists who lean on their legacy, or mistake controversy for creativity. Coded language that unmistakably pointed at Ozzy. And while some chalked it up to Mustaine's notorious volatility, others recognized a deeper pain for all his talent and technical skill. He never got the nod from one of metal's biggest kings. In a world where validation means everything, being iced out by Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just disappointing, it was unforgivable. And for Dave Mustaine, that sting never really went away. Blackie Lawless, the fire-wielding, blood-spewing architect behind W.A.S.P, was never shy about spectacle, but he also believed in structure, purpose, and above all, authenticity and performance. So when Ozzy Osbourne's outrageous behavior began to eclipse his music, Lawless didn't just roll his eyes, he reportedly declared war. Their feud, which began in the early 1980s, wasn't about who could be more shocking, it was about who deserved to be. According to Circus Magazine editor Catherine Turman, Lawless referred to Ozzy as a one-trick pony who got lucky with a bat, and saw his wild image as a crutch for weak showmanship. W.A.S.P invested in elaborate horror-themed productions, meticulously crafted to create immersive, theatrical metal experiences. But to Lawless, Ozzy's performances were amateur, chaotic, sloppy, and devoid of true artistry. His contempt only deepened as Ozzy's fame continued to explode, packing arenas while W.A.S.P fought for space in the same saturated market. Lawless reportedly vented to a French magazine in 1985 that some people mistake accidents for artistry, a jab clearly aimed at Ozzy's unpredictable stage behavior. At the height of the PMRC hearings, when both W.A.S.P and Ozzy were under fire from conservative America for corrupting youth, Lawless could have found common cause with Osbourne. But instead of solidarity, their disdain grew deeper. At a 1985 industry meeting about the hearings, witnesses claim Lawless refused to sit at the same table as Ozzy, allegedly saying, "I won't be associated with amateur hour." Even years later, Lawless never softened. When asked about the pioneers of shock rock, he praised Alice Cooper and Kiss, but never Ozzy. It wasn't about jealousy, it was about principle. To Lawless, Ozzy had hijacked the language of spectacle and turned it into a joke, something that mocked the very performance art that Lawless had spent his life building. In the war of shock and awe, Lawless believed he had substance, while Ozzy had stunts. And in his mind, metal deserved better than the clown with a crown. Asterisk of all the rivalries in Ozzy Osbourne's chaotic legacy, none cut deeper were shocked. More than the one with Tony Iommi, his Black Sabbath bandmate, and the architect of heavy metal's most haunting riffs. To the outside world, they were musical soulmates, bonded by the creation of a genre. But behind the scenes, their relationship was riddled with betrayal, bitterness, and years of unresolved tension. The fracture began in the late 1970s, when Ozzy's drug use and erratic behavior reached unbearable levels. According to former Sabbath manager Patrick Meehan Jr., Iommi confided that Ozzy had become a liability masquerading as a frontman, and that his antics were overshadowing the band's musical achievements. The final straw came when Ozzy was fired from Black Sabbath in 1979, a decision that devastated fans, but to Iommi felt necessary to save the band. But if anyone thought their issues ended there, they were wrong. Iommi reportedly viewed Ozzy's solo success as a betrayal of their shared vision, transforming Sabbath's dark artistry into what he called a traveling freak show. Every reunion afterward, no matter how smiling on the surface, was reportedly fueled more by money than reconciliation. At their 1997 rehearsal for a comeback tour, insiders claimed Iommi barely spoke to Ozzy outside of musical directions, treating him like a session vocalist instead of a creative equal. Even at their Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, body language experts noted the cold distance between them. And Iommi's speech notably excluded any mention of Ozzy's contributions. This wasn't a petty rivalry, it was a family rupture. Iommi, the reserved mastermind, had created the blueprint for metal. Ozzy, the unhinged showman, had lit it on fire. And as their careers marched forward, the philosophical gap only widened. Iommi reportedly told close friends that he hated what Ozzy had become, not just the persona, but the empire built on madness and mayhem. For him, it wasn't about envy, it was about integrity. Watching his former bandmate bask in the spotlight for antics rather than art felt like watching a masterpiece get auctioned off at a circus. It was the ultimate betrayal, being hated by the man who helped build your legend. Asterisk. It's tempting to look at Ozzy Osbourne's long list of enemies and write it off as the cost of fame. But these feuds weren't just about clashing egos. They were about the definition of heavy metal itself. In every case, from Dio's devotion to artistry, to Anselmo's hunger for evolution, from Dickinson's commitment to musical purity, to Iommi's wounded legacy, the anger directed at Ozzy was rooted in a deeper philosophical divide. To these artists, Ozzy wasn't just controversial, he was dangerous. Not because of the bats or the headlines, but because he had redefined what success looked like in metal. He proved that shock could outshine skill, that chaos could be marketable, that being unpredictable was sometimes more powerful than being precise. That terrified the purists, the technicians, the visionaries who had labored over lyrics, riffs, and authenticity. Ozzy's success disrupted the system. He wasn't a musician in their mold. He was something entirely different. And that difference was polarizing. These 6 musicians didn't just hate Ozzy because of who he was, they hated what he represented. The triumph of spectacle over substance, and the enduring question of whether metal is about music or myth. In a way, their hatred was a twisted form of respect, because no one bothers despising someone who doesn't matter. Make no mistake, mattered. In the end, the story of Ozzy Osbourne isn't just a tale of a man who broke the rules. It's the story of a man who rewrote them, burned the old script, and dared the world to follow his madness. He turned chaos into career, scandal into stardom, and fear into fascination. For some, he was the savior of metal. For others, its worst betrayal. But love him or loathe him, Ozzy forced the world and his rivals to pay attention. Maybe that's the real legacy here, not the feuds, not the headlines, not even the music, but the undeniable truth that Ozzy Osbourne made sure no one in metal could ever ignore him. So as the Prince of Darkness continues to cast his long shadow over the genre, the question lingers. Can you be truly iconic without making a few enemies along the way? Maybe Ozzy's life proves that being hated is just another form of being legendary.